What's up, MetaNerdz? This video is all about the cloning facilities on Kamino. We're going to talk about how the hatcheries worked, and what their life was like from an infant all the way up until they were actually deployed for combat. Let's first take a look at Typoca City, the place where all the magic happened. It was the capital of Kamino, and it was also the site of the largest cloning facility on the planet. The Kaminoans were considered the best at cloning throughout the entire galaxy, and the formula for how to do it so well was kept as basically a state secret. The city had to be built on stilts, because thousands of years before, their entire planet was flooded due to climate change. Each of these platforms seen here are all dedicated to cloning, and millions of Kaminoans worked here, but only on the cloning program or with the supporting bureaucracy. There are no residences or businesses there, and the only Kaminoans that could be said to actually live in Typoca City are the Prime Minister, the military staff, and there were also a group of apartments for the cloning scientists. But even these scientists would rotate shifts of 3 months on, 3 months off. Because cloning was so important to the economy of the Kaminoans, and Typoca City was its main cloning facility, they also made it the home of the Kaminoan Space Control and Kaminoan Planetary Defense Forces. The city was protected by energy shielding, but also had a ton of turbo laser emplacements. Knowing that these shields wouldn't fully protect them from troops, they also had Kaminoan soldiers placed at these facilities as well. You could look at each of the different dome platforms, almost like different colleges, within the larger university that was Typoca City. Many of these were dedicated to just cloning, but some of these structures were dedicated to different things. For example, one was a military education complex, one would house important assets like the DNA, and one would act as the clone barrack. Though, like we see in episode 2, in some of these domes, you could literally see the fetus in the growth chamber, the children doing their simulations, and the adults in the mess hall, with other fully armored clones going through drills, all in the same platform, and all within viewing distance of each other, which had to create a very powerful psychological effect. Let's go ahead and jump into a breakdown of each of these parts, starting with the growth chamber. These were also called the hatcheries, and they were a series of discs that were all studded with individual cylinders. Jango Fett's modified genetic material, which was modified to make him less aggressive and more likely to follow orders, was injected into eggs to make artificial embryos. These embryos were placed inside of these glass chambers, which worked as an artificial womb. In this womb was a bath of embryonic nutrients, which made sure that the clone would be as healthy as possible. Once they grew into the fetal stage, you can actually see that there are some tubes and wires inside of this glass canister. This helped to provide additional nutrients, as well as provide diagnostics. Next to each tank, you'll see that there's a whole screen of data, which lets the Kaminoan workers know that it's getting enough energy supply, that the clone is healthy, receiving all of its nutrients, and that it's growing at the expected rate. All of these features made sure that they had a survival rate of over 90%. But occasionally there would be an issue with an individual tank, but what's interesting is that sometimes an entire batch would develop an issue. If an issue was detected early, that batch might be aborted, but if not, that clone would be raised and put into a non-military position. Or if they were just messed up in a way that made them particularly useful in the battlefield, then they would become like the troopers we see in the Bad Batch arc, who were all kinda messed up, but in a way that made them perfect as a Black Ops unit. In episode 2, when we saw Obi-Wan touring the facilities, he passed through a part called the Central Armory, where we can see fully armored clone troopers in rank and file, as well as getting some of their weapons. This was a part of one of the more interesting domes of Typoca City. Called the Clone Military Education Complex, this is the part that turned Jango boys into men. At a young age, we saw that they were playing war games, and wore helmets that could analyze their brainwaves, retinal data, and stress levels while trying to hone their skills. This early data was used to help sort individual troopers, and help to figure out what they would specialize in. But some of the more interesting parts were the simulated battlefields. Sometimes they employed real droids, whereas other times it was just holograms, and would operate kind of like a giant virtual reality video game. To monitor the clones, there was a series of observation decks, and Jango Fett himself would often personally oversee a lot of these battles. These simulation rooms came in a bunch of different sizes and shapes, with many of them being smaller close-quarters combat simulations. Some were narrow like we see during the Clone Wars episode, some were larger but still only simulated a small part of a battle, but there were also enormous empty rooms, which could simulate much larger battlefields and accommodate for longer mission times and more complex objectives. The way these larger battlefields works is pretty ingenious. Thousands of small repulsor lift platforms would all change to accommodate different terrains. These are all covered in full spectrum holograms, combined with weather simulations, which could generate wind, ice, rain, extreme heat, and all kinds of different weather patterns. These larger simulation rooms could accommodate lots of vehicles, and so these clones were trained under circumstances that could only be more realistic if they were in actual combat. There are also separate training facilities used for ARC troopers, and an advanced academy for clone commanders. And the Clone Military Education Complex had one more important feature. It also contained enormous hangar bays that were full of transports which were ready to carry off the clone troopers, who after a decade of training, from the glass womb, to the war games, to the automated food dispensers in the mess hall, after countless hours spent in hand-to-hand combat, squad-based simulations, and full-size battle simulations, these clones were ready to board transports and head out to the capital of the Republic at Coruscant. Well, that's it for a clone's life on Kamino. from growth chamber to deployment. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button, and be sure to leave a comment down below if I missed any cool facts, or if you have a suggestion for future videos. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at MetaNerdz so you can see us build Star Wars props and cosplays, along with some other cool Star Wars stuff. If you want to help support this channel, check out the description below for our Amazon store and our Patreon. And be sure to subscribe, because we're making videos like this every single day. But most important of all, remember, good soldiers follow orders, and the Force will be with you, always.